Opinions as premises. Assessing acceptability. You know that there are two different types of premises or claims found in arguments: facts and opinions. To evaluate an argument, you must assess these claims to determine whether they are true, in the case of facts, or if truth cannot be determined, whether they are acceptable. Since determining their truth is not possible, all opinions and some factual claims must be judged by the standard of acceptability. In this episode, you will learn when to use this acceptability standard and how to judge it. You will consider different benchmarks for acceptability and how to apply your critical thinking skills to claims that are, by their very nature, the subject of strongly different perspectives and views. When to use the acceptability standard. 3 categories of claims. There are 3 categories of claims for which you should use the standard of acceptability when evaluating their standing in an argument. The first category includes factual claims that are actually true or false, but their truth cannot be determined with certainty for practical reasons. It includes claims that are universal generalizations that describe large populations. So, for example, claims made about all members of a certain species, like all donkeys, or all types of land meeting certain criteria, like all deserts. When someone makes a universal claim concerning all members or parts of a given group, it is the case that their claim is either true, all deserts have cacti, or false, not all deserts have cacti. But if the total population of the group is very large, you and others might not have the resources to actually examine each individual member to figure out whether the claim is true or false. In this case, you might settle for some level of acceptability based on sampling or examining a certain percentage of the population. A second category of claims for which you should apply the standard of acceptability are claims where it is impossible, even in theory, to figure out whether they're true or not. Predictions are excellent examples of these claims. So imagine you're meeting with your academic advisor to discuss getting admitted into a certain major. At this time, you're taking the last class you need to get accepted into the major. You tell your advisor, "I will get an A on our final exam next week and will therefore get an A in this class. Because I know that will happen, you should admit me into the major right now." You've made a prediction about your performance in the class that will prove to be either true or false. But at the time of your meeting with your advisor, you don't know with certainty if your claim is true or false. She has to evaluate your argument with the information available at that time. It's impossible for her, or even you, to know. So, to assess the acceptability of your prediction, she might examine your past performance, the grades you've already received on assignments in that class, and grades you've received in other classes, to evaluate how acceptable your prediction seems. Finally, a third category of claims you evaluate based on their acceptability are those that are not empirical in nature. Now, this category includes claims about aesthetic, moral, and ethical questions having to do with beauty, fairness, equality, justice, right and wrong, good and bad. These questions require premises that have nothing to do with the things you can sense. This means that they can never be proven true or false, even in theory or with the benefit of hindsight, as with predictions. Nonetheless, these claims are essential in evaluating arguments about personal, social, cultural, economic, and political problems. As difficult as it may be, you must evaluate these arguments when they lead to 2 opposing conclusions. Just as when one person says, "That law is unjust," and another says, "No, the law is perfectly just." Both can't be correct. The 2 arguments are in direct conflict. As you evaluate the arguments, you must determine which claim is more acceptable. Now, you will learn more about how to assess the degree of acceptability of different types of claims. Empirical claims involve objects or events you can directly experience. But sometimes, for practical or timing reasons, it's difficult or impossible to evaluate their truthfulness. For these claims, you must leave aside the search for definitive truth and focus instead on how acceptable these claims are. For these claims, people measure acceptability in terms of plausibility. How plausible a claim seems can be assessed by asking two questions. First, is X possible? That is, could X actually happen or exist? Then you ask yourself, is X reasonably possible? That is, even if X is technically possible, is it realistic to believe it would happen? If you answer no to both questions, then the claim can be judged as implausible. If you answer yes to the first question, that X is possible, but no to the second, that it's not technically possible, then you might evaluate the claim as being of low plausibility. If you answer yes to both questions, then the claim could be considered highly plausible. These two steps constitute a powerful way to determine the acceptability of a claim whose truth you don't or can't know. The degree of plausibility you assign to these claims goes a long way in determining whether you are willing to accept the conclusion. You can also think of probability as a way of quantifying plausibility. That is, probability is usually a measure associated with quantitative information like the result of a statistical test. You can use probability in measuring the odds of a quarter falling with heads face up a certain number of times in a row, the chances of hitting a full house in poker, or the likelihood that a certain candidate will win an election based on the results of polls. You can think of probability as a more precise measure than plausibility. A highly plausible claim is something judged to be A, possible, and B, reasonable. The plausibility of a claim can be measured at any point between never and always. In numerical terms, the probability of a claim being true can be any number between 0 and 1. In general, you do not apply standards of plausibility and probability to non-empirical claims, such as claims that address questions of aesthetics and morality. Because there is no ultimate definitive truth out there for such claims, you cannot speak of them as being more or less probable, more or less likely to occur or exist. Instead, people often rely on general principles or standards to help them evaluate the acceptability of a specific claim. Questions of beauty or appearance invoke subjective standards related to balance, structure, unity, color, and so on. Moral and ethical issues bring in value standards, arguments about rights, and discussion of consequences. In both cases, these general principles or standards may exist on many levels: individual, familial, or communal, or cultural, on a regional, local, national, or international scale, and they can change over time. When you are asked to evaluate an argument grounded in non-empirical claims, you must figure out what general principles of aesthetics or moral standards you'll use to judge their acceptability. As you do so, you must be aware that the principles or standards you use may differ from those used by the argument's author or by others who are evaluating it. In order to apply your critical thinking skills well, you must be able to explain the principles you're using for judgment and be willing to engage others in a discussion about those principles. Finally, another aspect of assessing the acceptability of all three types of claims is to consider the implications of the claim. Does X fit with other things you believe or know to be true? If not, then you should judge that premise to be less acceptable. If you do take X to be acceptable, what other premises are you then bound to accept? What follows from X? And are those things acceptable? So say your friend tells you, I'm a law-abiding citizen. I never break the law. But I don't believe that I should only go 25 miles an hour on a 4-lane road. That's asking too much. Does breaking the speed limit when you think it's unreasonably low fit with someone claiming to be a law-abiding citizen? Is the claim of being a law-abiding citizen acceptable? You should now have some idea of how to evaluate claims that cannot be determined to be definitively true or false. However, don't worry if you experience difficulty when you examine arguments in your classes or in other settings. Many, if not most arguments, are not easy to evaluate, and many premises will be really tough to assess. The most important thing is that you use the critical thinking skills you're developing to figure out what kind of premises you're dealing with and do your best to reconcile those premises with reasonable, clearly stated principles. If you're open and clear about the process you've used in evaluating premises, then you can engage in productive discussion with others about arguments and problems.